Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Elder Randy was incredibly touched because everyone could see how important the crystal ball was to the elves, and no one would give up an opportunity to extort and take advantage of the elves. However, Lin Li actually gave the chance up without hesitation and simply asked for a price reduction in the herbs. After hearing Lin Li's answer, Princess Alun and the other elves began to feel guilty and remorseful for the thoughts they had about Lin Li in the past. They did not expect there to be such generous human being, and felt that they had wronged him previously. Even they themselves might never be so magnanimous. Cheyenne could not help but look at Lin Li strangely. Although he did not understand how powerful Lin Li truly was, he had contacted him way before this after all, and he was still very clear about Lin Li's character. He didn't believe what Lin Li had just said about seeing the elves as his friends, because he knew that Lin Li would never hesitate to take advantage of someone. He knew that Lin Li did not let go of such opportunity simply because he and the elves had gone through difficulties together. However, the purpose of Elder Randy had been achieved anyway, and although they still felt that they had done Lin Li a little wrong, Elder Randy had no choice but to temporarily mistreat Lin Li, who was a rare kind amongst humans. Looking at the ashamed elves, Lin Li moved towards the side calmly, giving Elder Randy the space to collect the crystal ball. When exploring treasure vaults, most people would bring their magical equipment along. Elder Randy first smiled at Lin Li and expressed his gratitude. He then turned to face the huge crystal ball, opened his hand slowly, and pressed it against the surface of the ball. After the crystal ball was stowed away by Elder Randy, the hall suddenly became rather empty. Although there were many advanced magic objects, they could not attract anyone's interest or attention at all. After communicating with each other, they decided to continue on to the second floor of the tower. However, after seeing the crystal ball, everyone really could not imagine anything more valuable than the crystal ball that could be present on the second floor. On the side of the hall, everyone found the stairs leading to the second floor. The high elf's wasteful behavior could no longer surprise them, because they were already used to it. The second floor felt the same, but the staircase was extremely luxurious and extravagant. They slowly made their way up. When they finally saw everything on the second floor, they still could not help but be startled by the sight despite having become accustomed to the extravagance of the high elves. However, this time, what scared them was not the luxurious decor, because there was almost nothing inside. There was no need to pass through any corridors, because they could already see a large and spacious hall, though it was dimly lit and was completely opposite to the first floor. It didn't seem to be part of the magic tower at all, and looked more like an old grocery warehouse, especially since there were plenty of boxes. Everyone glanced at each other in puzzlement. Could it be that the high elves had placed all the superior items on the first floor and ignored the higher ones? Walking into the hall that practically looked like, or rather was, a warehouse, everyone could not help but frown. They could never imagine that there would be such a shabby place in the high elf's territory. The stacked wooden boxes had all decomposed over time. The once beautiful designs on the top were now mottled, and thick dust had accumulated on the boxes. Since there was no one to keep the place tidy for more than 1,300 years, it was a miracle that the place was not completely covered in dust. They finally realized how ruthless time was. This was the most powerful magic in the world. Even the splendid civilization created by the high elves couldn't avoid the test and torment of time. The dusty warehouse and old wooden boxes were the proof of the high elves' fall. However, although everything here seemed shabby and moldy, everyone could not help but gasp in shock after detecting the amazing magical waves from the wooden boxes. The wooden boxes that seemed unassuming all exuded strong magical waves that seemed to be summoning them eagerly and tempting them into opening the wooden boxes quickly so that they could be exposed to light again. Feeling the violent aggression in the magical waves, they were all sure that the boxes contained powerful magic equipment used by the high elves during their reign. The crowd approached the wooden boxes. Cheyenne used a little magic to clean up the dust on the wooden boxes before lifting the lid slowly. However, when he saw the contents, he was so astonished that he almost put the lid back on. The others were just as shocked, and they could not hide their fear at all. Staring at the boxes, none of them could take their eyes off them at all, not even Elder Randy. Just as everyone expected, there were dozens of staffs neatly placed in the box, but no one could imagine how perfectly exquisite the craftsmanship of the staffs was. Every mageweth and array were perfect, and the only flaw was that the magic crystal at the top seemed to be a little lackluster. However, it was the dull magical crystal that made everyone exclaim in shock. It was the Dark Moon Staff. When faced with the Dark Moon Staff, no one in Amril could remain calm. Legend had it that there were 2 moons in the night sky when the High Elves ruled Amril. One was called the Golden Moon, while the other was the Dark Moon. The Golden Moon was regarded as a symbol of peace, harvest, and kindness. The Dark Moon, on the other hand, symbolized war, disaster, and evil. During the Dark Age, apart from the invincible sky castles, another force that became an eternal nightmare for the dominated races was undoubtedly the powerful Magic Legion. They were the elites among the High Elves, possessing the best genes and equipped with the best magical equipment. They were invincible in Amril, and any enemies that incurred their wrath would face destruction. They annihilated and restrained all the forces that rebelled against the High Elven Queen, be it those who had been dominated or the royals who were also High Elves. They swept the endless abyss, and even the powerful demon lords had to submit to them. As long as the queen wielded her scepter, they would show no mercy and kill their enemies, even if the latter was a deity. It could be said that the Magic Legion had left a deep impression on the people in Amril, just like the Sky Castles. One type of magical equipment used by members of the Magic Legion was the Dark Moon Staff that was sitting quietly in the box at this moment. Everyone took a deep breath and looked around. Since the Dark Moon Staff was stored in the wooden box, the other wooden boxes should undoubtedly contain the other equipment of the Magic Legion. It was not just a random guess, because the equipment of the Magic Legion was extremely difficult to build and required precious materials. Even with the huge material supply of the elves, it would still be impossible to build the equipment without stopping. Otherwise, a stronger Magic Legion would have been established. Therefore, each of those pieces of equipment was built while adhering to a strict plan and protocol. It was impossible for there to be a Dark Moon Staff without other equipment. Since a Dark Moon Staff was there, they reckoned that the other boxes contained the Pharaoh's robe and blade of heartbreak. Those 3 pieces of magical equipment were the 3 standard ones necessary for the Magic Legion. Although they were the standard equipment, each piece was extremely elaborate and exquisite. For instance, although the Dark Moon Staff was less powerful than Lin Li's Helios Scepter, the various skills used, be it the mageweths or the arrays, were not inferior to that of Helios Scepter. The reason that the Dark Moon Staff was not as powerful as Helios Scepter was the difference in the materials used. After all, the material that Helios Scepter was made of couldn't meet the production rate of standard equipment. Hence, it was impossible to create a second piece. The Pharaoh's robe and blade of heartbreak were the same as the Dark Moon Staff, and the materials used were the best, while the various techniques involved in their creation were definitely the most superior. During the Dark Age, the 3 pieces of magical equipment were only eligible for use by the Magic Legion, which was absolutely loyal to the High Elven Queen. Even the prestigious royals could not use them. Staring at the wooden boxes around them, they reckoned that there should be at least hundreds of mages who could be equipped with such a set, thus forming a weaker Magic Legion. Although it was nothing compared to the High Elves' Magic Legion, it was definitely a powerful force that no one in Amril would dare to despise or belittle. No one could refuse such a temptation. Cheyenne's hand began trembling slightly when he was holding on to the lid of the wooden box. Although he didn't say anything, he was staring at Lin Li. The elves were completely out of his consideration, for he did not even look at them. The greatest function of the crystal ball on the first floor was unbreakable defense. Although it could protect the Manhwa family from invasion, it would play a relatively small role in the development of the Manhwa family. If they could obtain this batch of powerful magic equipment, the Manhwa family would then have a powerful Magic Legion, which would be an opportunity for the Manhwa family to rise. Hence, after seeing the Dark Moon Magic Staff, Cheyenne immediately forgot about the crystal ball that he was still reluctant to give up moments ago. However, whether or not he could get that equipment depended on Lin Li's intentions. Knowing that the 3 standard types of equipment of the Magic Legion were stored here, Elder Randy began to feel overwhelmed with regret despite still remaining calm on the surface. Had he known earlier, he wouldn't have vied for that crystal ball. How could a defensive object compare to such powerful magical equipment? After all, the crystal ball could only at most buy some time for the elves, but the magical equipment would give the elves a greater power. Not only would it be an effective deterrent to other forces, it would bring about better results when used flexibly. However, now that the crystal ball had been taken away by Elder Randy, he could no longer ask for the magical equipment, and had no choice but to give it to the others. Cheyenne stared at Lin Li for a long time, but he seemed indifferent and unfazed. No one could tell what he thought about the magical equipment, because he didn't have much of a reaction. After thinking about it for a moment, Cheyenne finally couldn't take it anymore. He calmed himself down, and said to Lin Li, "Mage Phallic, I'm sure you know the value of this magical equipment. If we split it equally amongst the 3 of us, it would nothing more than let us gain an insignificant amount of power, so I think it's better to let one force keep all the equipment in order to maximize its effectivity. The Manhwa family does need such a power, so if you have anything you want in exchange for it, you may bring it up. As long as it doesn't affect our foundation, I'll agree to it. In the future, the Manhwa family will definitely render help to the Tower of Dusk whenever required too." Cheyenne directly revealed his bottom line, which was a taboo during negotiation. However, he was no longer negotiating with Lin Li. In other words, Cheyenne knew very well that he was actually not qualified to negotiate and bargain with Lin Li. Hence, there was no need to beat around the bush. However, Lin Li was impartial, so he did not intend to rip the Manhwa family off, just like how he did not extort the elves. He smiled at Cheyenne, and said, "You're making it sound too serious, Master Cheyenne. The Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk have been cooperating for a long time, and this time I was invited by you. I can't put you in a spot, anyway. Well, if I don't ask for anything, I'm afraid you'll feel bad. So, I shall ask for one thing randomly. The pharmaceutical market in Aminya City has always been chaotic. Why don't you give it to the Tower of Dusk?" Upon hearing the condition proposed by Lin Li, Cheyenne was filled with gratitude and felt that Lin Li was a true friend. Cheyenne was shocked and overjoyed, and he quickly nodded while agreeing to the condition. He felt that the pharmaceutical market was not that big of a deal, and the Tower of Dusk's potions had always been popular anyway. Watching Cheyenne rejoice and collect the magical equipment, Lin Li stood still without a tinge of reluctance. Lin Li was certainly not the kind to sacrifice himself for others. The only reason he had repeatedly made concessions was because he had his own plans in mind. They were in the central tower of the Sky Castle, and not the Immortal King's territory. How could the Immortal King's collection be inferior? What was the point of competing with the others now? Moreover, a crystal sphere that was meant for defense wasn't too important to the Tower of Dusk. As for the equipment of the Magic Legion, Lin Li felt that it wasn't suitable for the mages from the Tower of Dusk, though it could be considered top-tier magical equipment. Although the Tower of Dusk had been established not long ago, it had gradually formed its own system of mage cultivation. The equipment here was designed based on the characteristics of the High Elf's Magic Legion. Although others could use it, they would still face all kinds of problems. It was like wearing shoes, even a size bigger or smaller wouldn't be suitable even though the wearer could still fit into it. Lin Li had the ability to construct his own magical equipment. Instead of using the equipment used by others before, it was better to construct his own equipment for his men. Moreover, although the equipment from the Magic Legion was of high level, Lin Li was confident that he could construct similar one with a bit more effort. After Cheyenne had taken all the magical equipment, his eyes were filled with gratitude for Lin Li, though he didn't say it directly. Where else could he find such an ally who would give up such precious magical equipment without hesitation? Even with Cheyenne's status, he couldn't help but feel genuinely grateful to Lin Li. Cheyenne even kindly hoped that the third level contained some magical equipment that had equal value as this batch. After all, he couldn't let his good ally there suffer. Mage Felix, Mage Cheyenne, we have already collected all the items here. Is it time for us to explore the third floor? Chief Elder Randy didn't want to stay here any longer. Seeing that Cheyenne had taken box after box of magical equipment, Chief Elder Randy's heart was bleeding. However, although he was very regretful and strongly desired that magical equipment, Chief Elder Randy didn't dare to have other thoughts, and only cast all his hopes on the later exploration. After leaving the warehouse where Cheyenne had cleared everything, the team proceeded upstairs. With different individual sentiments, the team walked towards the third floor of the central tower. After climbing up the long spiral staircase, everyone was stunned by what they saw on the third floor of the tower. They weren't stunned because of some rare and precious items there, but rather the exact opposite. The third floor hall was so empty that it didn't seem to contain anything. If it weren't for the mud on the ground, the team would have thought that they were teleported back to the second floor because of some illusion magic. At that instant, Lin Li couldn't help but doubt his earlier speculation. Could it be that the immortal king's treasure only consisted of those items on the earlier 2 floors? Although the items discovered there were definitely considered treasures, how could the immortal king's treasure be so simple? Honestly speaking, both Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne pitied Lin Li a little after seeing this empty hall. Of course, it was impossible for them to spare Lin Li some items that they had already gotten. After all, sympathy and interests were 2 separate matters. How could the immortal king only have these? Even Lin Li wasn't interested in those items, so how could the immortal king treat them as treasures? Lin Li couldn't believe it, so he stepped forward to see if the hall was really empty or something was hidden in it. Whether out of sympathy or other reasons, Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne hurried after Lin Li when they saw him walk forward unconvinced. However, once they had stepped into the hall, they felt something wasn't right. They could clearly feel a gush of mana swarming into their bodies the moment they entered the hall. In an instant, they had recovered the mana they could only get through meditation. Shocked, Cheyenne immediately closed his eyes and attempted to meditate. Much to his disbelief, just a moment of meditation had recovered all his mana, which had been almost exhausted during the battle in the 7-realm spiral. A process was needed to transform the magical elements into one's own mana. However, Cheyenne didn't feel this transformation process at all during the moment of meditation just now. It felt as if the mana was his in the first place, and he just had to absorb it into his body. Although the concentration of magical elements correlated with the effect of meditation to a certain extent, it was impossible to reach such high efficiency. Cheyenne was even worried that there was something wrong with himself, but he didn't sense any abnormality with his body after careful inspection. As for the mana he had gotten through meditation just now, it felt the same as the mana he had always used, and didn't feel foreign at all. Feeling the brimming mana in his body, Cheyenne was totally convinced that he had recovered to the peak of his power now. Even his mental strength, which couldn't be recovered via meditation but required natural recovery, totally recovered. This was a miracle. Even if he had directly taken a high-level magical potion, it probably wouldn't achieve the same effect as this. The others were equally shocked. Chief Elder Randy, who had a doubtful look on his face, started scanning the surroundings, hoping to find the real reason for this. No matter who it was, he could think it was a serious problem for a gush of unknown mana to swarm in for no apparent reason. However, the empty hall was like a gigantic box. The clean walls didn't hold any traces of magewefts or alchemy arrays. There was also nothing special about the floor under their feet. Other than being filled with mana, there was nothing suspicious about this hall. The overflowing mana confirmed Lin Li's speculation that something was definitely hidden in this empty hall. With this thought in mind, Lin Li slowly walked towards the center of the hall, and his vision was suddenly fixed on a spot in the air. If one were to look from afar, he wouldn't be able to see anything special about this spot. However, Lin Li seemed to have found what he had been looking for there, and his lips curved in a smile. Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne had also arrived at this spot by now. Both of them looked in the direction Lin Li was staring in spontaneously. What was floating in midair was a grain-sized little thing that emitted a faint glow. However, the mana it possessed made everyone here turn pale. The Seed of Eternity. Chief Elder Randy suddenly gasped. Even if the immortal king were to appear in front of him now, he probably wouldn't be so flabbergasted. After all, Chief Elder Randy had experienced the Dark Age before, and had already reached Legendary Realm at the end of the Dark Age. Thus, his knowledge and experience were incomparable to a normal person's. Although Chief Elder Randy hadn't had the right to pray to the Tree of Eternity from which all High Elves had been born during the Dark Age, he was still familiar with the Tree of Eternity's aura. Even after 1,300 years, Chief Elder Randy could still vividly remember that aura. Chief Elder Randy's gasp evoked memories of the Seed of Eternity among everyone. Although it was only a legend, the appearance of the Seed of Eternity here made the legend no longer just a legend. Although everyone still found it unbelievable, they knew that Chief Elder Randy wouldn't say something that he couldn't be sure of. However, everyone still had the same doubt. If this strange thing was really the Seed of Eternity, could the 1,000-year-old legend be actually true? The Dark Age had ended more than 1,300 years ago. For a human who had a short lifespan, 1,300 years was undoubtedly a long time. A lot of things would have become illusory legends by now. The memories that had been evoked about the Seed of Eternity was just one of those legends. Back when Juresco killed the High Elves Queen under the Tree of Eternity, he destroyed the Tree of Eternity, which bred all High Elves to completely kill off any possibility of the High Elves reviving. From that moment, the High Elves walked towards complete decline. Under the force of the Coalition army, the remaining High Elves were wiped out as the last Sky Castle escaped into the crack between time and space and never appeared in Amril again. There was an accompanying legend which said that when the Tree of Eternity fell, it left a seed behind. Whoever got this seed would have the possibility of reviving the Tree of Eternity. Thus, at the end of the Dark Age, many people really went around looking for this seed, whether to prevent the High Elves from reviving or in search of the powerful strength of the Tree of Eternity. After countless disappointments and with the fact that nobody had ever seen this seed before, the legend remained a legend. Much to everyone's surprise, this legendary Seed of Eternity appeared in the Sky Castle 1,300 years after the end of the Dark Age. No wonder those people traveled all around Amril, but still didn't manage to find this Seed of Eternity. Nobody would have guessed that the Seed of Eternity had always been located in the Sky Castle controlled by the remaining High Elves. However, the team couldn't understand why those remaining High Elves in the Sky Castle didn't use the Seed of Eternity to revive the Tree of Eternity. Since the Tree of Eternity had born the High Elves, wouldn't the revived Tree of Eternity share the same ability? Why would those remaining High Elves give up on such a precious opportunity to revive their race? However, it was useless to think about these things now. Be it Chief Elder Randy or Cheyenne, they were more concerned about the great benefits the Tower of Dusk would get from this Seed of Eternity. If the legends were true, if the Tree of Eternity could really revive, then the future increase in power of the Tower of Dusk could only be described as terrifying. The High Elves born from the Tree of Eternity possessed such perfect magical talent that it had people jealous. However, the Tree of Eternity's power was not just that it gave birth to the High Elves. It was said that the Tree of Eternity had the heaven-defying ability to change one's magic potential. No matter how bad a mage's potential was, as long as he was bathed in the radiance of the Tree of Eternity, he had the possibility to break through to Legendary Realm. During the Dark Age, one of the rewards the High Elves Queen gave to outstanding warriors was the honor to pray to the Tree of Eternity. Frankly speaking, it just meant a chance to meditate under the Tree of Eternity and change their potential using the Tree of Eternity's power. After all, one's potential was determined since birth, and it limited how high one's achievements would be in the later stages of life. If a person had very low potential, no matter how much hard work he put in, he would still be limited by his potential. It was why some people couldn't study magic by nature, and some could only be mage apprentices for their entire lives, while others could reach Legendary Realm without many obstacles. One's potential couldn't be changed via hard work, but the Tree of Eternity could provide such rejuvenating power. Under the radiance of the Tree of Eternity, one would feel that he was revived continuously and his potential was increased little by little. Of course, the effect wasn't immediate. It would require a very long time even for the Tree of Eternity to make a person who had no magic potential at all to reach Legendary Realm. Even the process of doing so wouldn't be easy. Thus, it wouldn't increase the Tower of Dusk's power very much in a short span of time. However, the Tower of Dusk didn't have to rely on the Tree of Eternity to turn a fool into a genius. Once it had announced the news that it possessed the Tree of Eternity to the public, countless talented mages would be naturally attracted. By then, not to mention the breezy plains, the entire Anril would have to live in the Tower of Dusk's influence. Lin Li was quite familiar with all kinds of legends in Anril. After hearing Chief Elder Randy mention the Seed of Eternity, he immediately thought of what this seed meant to him. Looking at the floating Seed of Eternity not too far away, he smiled to Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne, and said, "I'm not going to be courteous now." Evidently, Lin Li's expression didn't show any signs of being courteous, but rather a firm determination to get the Seed of Eternity. After all, this was the one and only Seed of Eternity. Nobody could resist such a temptation. "Oh, please go ahead." After recovering from their shock, Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne replied while struggling to put up a smile. Beneath their smile, they regretted so much that they wanted to chop their hands off. If they had known that the third floor held the Seed of Eternity, they wouldn't have fought over the items in the lower two floors no matter what. So what if the crystal sphere was huge? It was only a defense tool that could let a person hide inside it. Moreover, there was a limit to how much pressure it could take. There was no such thing as impenetrable defense. Even the purportedly infallible sky castles had fallen one by one during the war at the end of the Dark Age. Chief Elder Randy hadn't counted on the crystal sphere to protect the elves from harm. He only hoped that it could win some time for the elves to turn the tides during times of crisis. However, if they had the Seed of Eternity, if the Tree of Eternity could be revived in the Emerald Forest, then the elves wouldn't have to worry about humans attacking the Emerald Forest. By then, it would be the human nations that'd fear the elves. For the elves, the Tree of Eternity was too important. Although the elves wouldn't try to raid human warriors, the benefits that elves could get from the Tree of Eternity would definitely be much greater than for humans. After all, almost all elves now had the blood of the High Elves. The Tree of Eternity might not be able to bring the elves to the heights of the High Elves' rule, but it could definitely make the elves a notable race in Anril. Such a pity. Chief Elder Randy couldn't help but sigh. Was he really too old now that he had made so many wrong judgments? Snatching that damned crystal sphere hastily on the first floor, he didn't have the courage to bet on the treasures on the upper floors. As a result, he missed such a good opportunity to revive the elven race. After getting the 3 kinds of magical equipment owned by the High Elves Magic Legion, Cheyenne was originally in a good mood. In fact, he was very satisfied with what he had gotten for this trip while coming up to the 3rd floor. However, after seeing the Seed of Eternity, his regret was no less than Chief Elder Randy's. Although the magical equipment that Cheyenne had gotten was more valuable than the crystal sphere, it was nothing compared to the Seed of Eternity. So what if he had gotten the Magic Legion's equipment? Could his team reach the High Elves Magic Legion standard just by using that equipment? A group of archmages would still be just archmages even if they used it. The gap between an archmage and a legendary mage couldn't be made up for with mere equipment. On the other hand, while it was a bit exaggerating to say that the Tree of Eternity could turn an idiot into a genius, it could certainly make a mage with considerable potential reach Legendary Realm easily. In Anril, how many people were stuck at the peak of being an archmage and had no hope of reaching Legendary Realm now? Once the news about the Tree of Eternity spread, those archmages would swarm towards it. However, it was too late to change anything now. Although the team didn't make any agreements outrightly, they already had some sort of unspoken understanding from the earlier quests. Since they had already taken the items on the lower floors, they naturally had to leave this to Lin Li. What made Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne gloomy was Lin Li's behavior. Be it when they were collecting the crystal sphere or the Magic Legion's equipment, Lin Li didn't try to extort too much, though they were prepared to give up a lot. Moreover, Lin Li kept mentioning friends and allies, making himself seem so upright and just. However, it was all just a facade. Speaking of the Seed of Eternity, given its heaven-defying abilities, even the firmest alliance would inevitably fall apart under such temptation. Be it Chief Elder Randy or Cheyenne, neither was a merciful sort. After all, it was common for teams to turn against one another at the end of a hunt for treasure. However, although Lin Li was only a level 21 legendary mage, Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne didn't even dare to have such a thought. After all, Lin Li's true abilities was totally ahead of his level. Which level 21 legendary mage could easily break Steven's soul-devouring domain? Which level 21 legendary mage could survive a stealth attack from the legendary bandit Lansdale totally unharmed? The last guardian of the Seven Realms spiral shot legendary bandit Lansdale to his death from afar. That arrow made everyone feel a sense of desperation. However, what was his outcome in the end? He was killed by this level 21 legendary mage with just 3 arrows. Even now, everyone still shivered upon thinking of those 3 arrows. Although everyone here was clear that most of the power came from those 3 strange arrows themselves, they also knew that a normal level 21 legendary mage certainly couldn't control such power that was close to sanctuary level. In addition, other than those 3 arrows, who knew how many other secrets this level 21 legendary mage who continuously created miracles had? Level 21 was the best camouflage he had. Everyone who took the level seriously could certainly suffer. The team didn't move. Before Lin Li had taken the Seed of Eternity, a move could result in a misunderstanding. However, everyone still couldn't hide the envy and jealousy in their eyes. After all, this was the legendary Seed of Eternity. Any faction that got it would get a rise in power. No, not just a rise, but a great leap from the ground to the clouds. With all eyes on him, Lin Li slowly approached the Seed of Eternity. If not for the massive amount of mana hidden inside it, probably no one would pay any attention to this insignificant little seed. Lin Li stretched out his palm slowly, fearing that any slight air current would make the seed disappear. Only when Lin Li had really put the Seed of Eternity in his hand did Cheyenne and the rest dare to walk up to take a closer look at this legendary seed. However, when the team walked close to examine the Seed of Eternity's magical waves, they discovered a shocking fact. They couldn't sense the slightest bit of life from this Seed of Eternity. Although there was no such thing as eternity in this world, the Tree of Eternity was known for its endless vitality. Even if what everyone saw here was just a Seed of Eternity, it was impossible for it not to contain any trace of life, unless it was already dead. Although the amount of mana that the seed emitted continuously was still terrifyingly large, everyone could sense that its mana was deteriorating. This meant that the Seed of Eternity was merely emitting its previously accumulated mana, but couldn't generate any new mana now. As such, no matter how powerful its mana was, it would eventually be totally depleted. The question that puzzled everyone was thus easily answered. No wonder the remaining High Elves didn't use the Seed of Eternity to revive the Tree of Eternity. How could a dead seed grow into a tree? Lin Li frowned. This dead seed had gotten him excited for nothing, since it could never grow into the Tree of Eternity anyway. However, why did the Immortal King choose to put the dead Seed of Eternity here? After realizing that the Seed of Eternity was already dead, Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne finally felt life to be a bit more fair. Although the Seed of Eternity contained a large amount of mana, a dead Seed of Eternity was no more than a magical crystal with very large mana capacity. So what if it could allow a person to recover his mana quickly? The true value of the Seed of Eternity was already lost. The Tree of Eternity had the terrifying power that created the High Elves, who ruled over Anril for countless years. It could even create another powerful faction that could leave the entire continent shaking in fear. However, life was still fair, and didn't give anyone such a heaven-defying advantage. However, Lin Li's knitted brows relaxed after a short while. He didn't look disappointed like what everyone expected. Chief Elder Randy and Cheyenne couldn't help admiring this young mage's breadth of mind. No wonder he could accomplish so much at this age. Lin Li didn't look down on the dead Seed of Eternity. After careful inspection, he threw it into the ring of endless storm. Unlike what a lot of people would think, Lin Li wasn't too sad about getting a dead seed, because he believed that the immortal king wouldn't do something like this for nothing. Lin Li had a feeling that everything he had experienced since coming to Amril was somehow related to the immortal king. Although he wouldn't say that everything he had experienced had been planned by the immortal king, he knew that a lot was definitely linked to the immortal king. No matter what the immortal king was planning, Lin Li was sure that he had a reason behind what he did. Since the seed of eternity was placed here, then the method of rebirth should also be left here by the immortal king. Now, he just had to be careful and clever enough to discover it. Even if there wasn't any way to rejuvenate the seed of eternity, the seed was still extremely useful to Lin Li. Just the mana in the seed alone could let the baby elemental Wyrm almost reach adulthood. The baby elemental Wyrm Xiaohua was the successor of one of the 5 dragon aspects, the Dragon of Dream. Even if it couldn't fully mature from absorbing the mana from the seed, its power would still match that of an ancient dragon. By then, Xiaohua would have become a super strong fighter. Who would dare to offend Lin Li then? The only thing he had to be careful of was that projected avatar that was always lingering inside Xiaohua's body. Till now, Lin Li was still not sure what kind of presence the projected avatar was inside Xiaohua's body. The only thing he could do was to be highly alert since he couldn't think of any way to eliminate this potential threat. After Lin Li put away the seed of eternity, the 3rd floor hall was truly empty. Even the overwhelming mana that had radiated from the seed would disappear over time. Stepping out of the hall, the team walked towards the 4th floor of the tower. Almost everyone's face was beaming with anticipation. From the crystal ball and the 3 sets of magical equipment from the Magic Legion to the Seed of Eternity, the items seemed more and more valuable as they went up the tower. Although the Seed of Eternity was dead, its value still couldn't be underestimated. What kind of treasure awaited them on the 4th floor? Even Chief Elder Randy, who was the most disappointed person out of all, summoned up his energy once again and anticipated what the 4th floor would offer. After all, everyone got something on the first 3 floors, but from the 4th level onwards, everything depended on their own abilities. The elves were the wealthiest out of all, especially Chief Elder Randy, who was one of the 8 elders of the Emerald Council. Hence, he had immense decisive power over a lot of areas. If he really had to, he wouldn't hesitate to dump loads of money. As for the Tower of Dusk, although it was a small faction that was newly established, its president Lin Li's abilities seemed to be the top out of the 3 factions after he had shot the 3 arrows. Only Cheyenne from the Manhwa family seemed to be in an awkward position. Although the Manhwa family was given the title of the strongest family in the Breezy Plains, its wealth was certainly no match for the elves, and its power no match for the Tower of Dusks. However, Cheyenne was already very satisfied with the magical equipment that he had gotten from the 2nd floor. If there was really some surprising treasure on the upper floors, it would be good enough to get some benefits for the faction by using his power. Although everyone had their own considerations, they had similar anticipation for the treasure on the 4th floor. This was because no matter whether they could get it themselves, the higher the value of the treasure was, the more benefits they could get from it. However, when everyone reached the 4th floor of the central tower, they were again stunned by what they saw. There weren't any splendid decorations, but only an old storehouse that seemed thousands of years old. It was filled with thick white fog, making it hard for people to make out what was hidden in it. Looking at it from the door, the thick fog seemed to be constrained by something. Not even a tinge went beyond a certain unseen border, clearing a straight path towards the front. A lone stone platform stood at the end of the path. On the stone platform, a crystal ball floated in the midair, slowly revolving. Although the crystal ball was much bigger than the ones people usually saw, it was no match to the one Chief Elder Randy had gotten on the 1st floor. Moreover, judging from its slow revolving motion, it seemed to be operating normally. On the other hand, people couldn't see through the white fog on the sides of the path. They couldn't even penetrate the fog with their mental strength. However, they could sense all kinds of peculiar but extremely powerful aura seeping out from the fog. The team carefully walked along the path towards the stone platform. When the team reached the front of the stone platform, they heaved a sigh of relief and focused their vision on the crystal ball. Different scenes flashed in the crystal ball, as if displaying different domains. In each domain, there was only a magical beast or abyssal demon that was dead asleep. By then, everyone finally realized that the fourth floor of the central tower was a jail. The thick surrounding white fog should be the cells that locked these abyssal demons away. This jail should have made use of some space-enlarging effect. If not, so many different abyssal demons would not have been able to fit into this space. Since they could see what the situation was like in every cell via the crystal ball was evidently controlling all these cells. However, what was the use of that? Although these abyssal demons were powerful creatures, they could only act as additional fighters. How much could these demons contribute to the development of their factions? However, just as the team was disappointed with this crystal ball, Chief Elder Randy suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Without any explanations, he quickly moved near the crystal ball. It was very easy to use a crystal ball, one just had to inject some mental strength into it. This crystal ball left behind by the High Elves was no different. Chief Elder Randy placed a finger on the crystal ball and injected his mental strength. The images on the crystal ball flashed across rapidly, and finally fixed onto one. Looking at the fixed image on the crystal ball, Chief Elder Randy couldn't hide his excitement. Even his finger that was resting on the crystal ball was trembling slightly. Upon seeing Chief Elder Randy's bizarre reaction, Princess Elune and the other elves came over too. Once they saw what was shown on the crystal ball, they were all jaw-droppingly surprised. The crystal ball showed one of the many creatures locked in the cells. However, it wasn't any of the abyssal demons, but a pure white unicorn with a silver spiral horn and white wings tucked behind its back. Yes, this is the sacred item we are looking for, Goddess Manhwa's mount, the sacred unicorn. Chief Elder Randy tried hard to suppress his excitement, but his voice still trembled. Hearing Chief Elder Randy's words, everyone couldn't help but feel curious. Since this unicorn was Goddess Manhwa's mount, why would it be jailed in this place? After all, this was the High Elf Sky Castle. According to elven legends, Goddess Manhwa was riding her unicorn when she helped the desperate elves. At that time, the High Elves had already perished. There were many legends regarding the plight of the elves circulating around now. Not mentioning the legendary powerhouses, even farmers knew a thing or two about the elves. However, probably only Chief Elder Randy and the elves themselves knew what the real situation was like then. According to legends, under the pursuit of the human coalition army, the elves didn't have any living space in the whole of Amrel. The remaining elves could only escape to the Sierra Leone forest. Back then, the Sierra Leone forest used to be the place where people were sent for exile during the High Elf's reign. Countless powerhouses died there, and it was dangerous, even fatal. The forest was filled with poisonous fog. Even the strongest legendary powerhouse couldn't resist its poison. There were stinky and fatal poisonous swamps, powerful magical beasts, and even fierce carnivorous plants. That was a place more terrifying than the endless abyss. There was not a single safe spot, the whole forest was filled with fatal traps of nature. At any time, a magical beast could pounce towards you. Even if one was just standing near a tree, the person could risk being strangled by its vines and becoming the carnivorous plant's fertilizer. With a human army that had just overthrown the High Elf's rule wanting to wipe out the elves at the back, and the Sierra Leone forest which no one had walked out from alive in front, the elves were faced with totally hopeless situation with nowhere to go. However, just when the elves were driven to the depths of desperation, Goddess Manhwa performed a miracle. The elves saw the goddess slowly going into the Sierra Leone forest while riding her unicorn. In every place that this sacred unicorn had stepped, the thick poisonous fog disappeared like melting snow. The poisonous land was transformed into fertile land. When the unicorn walked past, those carnivorous plants lost their decaying form and green sprouts emerged. Those magical beasts also didn't dare to expose their sharp teeth and claws. They brought their bodies close to the ground, and their red eyes gradually became clear. In the sky, the looming dark clouds were penetrated by beams of sacred light. The light followed the steps of the unicorn, more and more light beams appeared until the dark clouds vanished, and the entire Sierra Leone forest was bathed in the goddess's glory. The dark, decaying colors of the Sierra Leone forest were replaced by a vibrant green. Grass emerged out of the soil and wild flowers instantaneously bloomed across the forest, sending waves of fragrance into the air. Under the goddess's glory, the entire Sierra Leone forest was brimming with vitality. From then, the Sierra Leone forest, once known as the Land of Despair, had a new name, Emerald Forest. However, the unicorn disappeared after that. No one knew where the unicorn had gone. They only knew that it hadn't left with Goddess Monfera. In fact, the reason Chief Elder Randy and the elves could find their way here was because the goddess had left a clue for them. Chief Elder Randy tapped the crystal ball gently. A ripple appeared on the image on the crystal ball. Then, a unicorn slowly walked out from the thick fog not far from where the team was standing with the crisp sound of its hooves. Although the unicorn had been confined in this prison for more than 1,000 years, its sacredness and purity didn't fade over time. Even after more than 1,000 years of confinement, the unicorn erupted with powerful mana waves immediately after it had been released from the fog. Its strong battle aura radiated throughout the hall. It didn't look like the drowsy and gloomy creature shown in the crystal ball at all. However, when the unicorn's vision swept across the crowd, it gradually restrained its aura after seeing the elves. Although the unicorn's eyes were still full of wariness, it was no longer in a ready-to-strike position, and seemed to have a lot of questions. Princess Elune suddenly started walking towards the unicorn, cautiously. Without using the Song of Heart, Princess Elune wouldn't be able to withstand even one blow from the unicorn. All the other elves, including Chief Elder Randy, couldn't help but feel extremely worried, just that nobody did anything. Finally, Princess Elune arrived in front of the unicorn. She lifted her arm slowly and gently placed her palm at the tip of the unicorn's silver spiral horn. The other elves finally heaved a sigh of relief then. The unicorn would only allow the purest and most trusted person to touch its horn. Now that this unicorn had allowed Princess Elune to touch its horn, it meant that Princess Elune had gained its approval. Princess Elune whispered to the unicorn as if explaining what had happened over the past 1,300 years. Maybe she had talked about the catastrophe the elves had gone through at the end of the Dark Age, for the unicorn's eyes widened in shock. Seeing the two humans, Lin Li and Cheyenne, as well as Lin Li's two undead servants, the unicorn's eyes were filled with disgust and hatred. Lin Li wasn't scared by the unicorn's expression, but Chief Elder Randy was frightened. He didn't want this unicorn that they had finally found to cause some irreversible trouble because of a historical problem from 1,300 years ago. Fortunately, who knew if it was because Princess Elune had said something to the unicorn, but it finally shifted its glance away from Lin Li with disdain. Even such a sacred creature acted in such a manner? Lin Li secretly found it very funny. He said to Chief Elder Randy, "Congratulations, Chief Elder Randy. You've finally found back your clan's sacred beast. What are your plans next?" Since Chief Elder Randy had come here to find this unicorn, would they leave this place or continue to explore the secrets of the tower now that the unicorn was already found? This was the central tower of a sky castle. Out of all the immortal king's treasures, how much of a gain was a crystal ball? The exploration had only just begun. Chief Elder Randy naturally wouldn't miss out on such a good opportunity. Although he was a little embarrassed, he still replied, "We've gone through so much to reach this place. I'll naturally continue to see what other items the immortal king has left behind." Chief Elder Randy's reply wasn't too surprising to Lin Li. If it was any other person, he wouldn't stop here, either. Lin Li asked this question only to remind Chief Elder Randy to keep track of the time. Since the unicorn had already accepted Princess Elune, there was no point wasting more time here. Princess Elune stopped communicating with the unicorn and returned to Chief Elder Randy's side. The unicorn followed her closely. Not only was it scornful of humans like Lin Li, it was equally so of male elves, like Chief Elder Randy. Although the team was rather disappointed with what they saw on the 4th floor, it was a great gain for the elves to find their sacred animal. However, just as the team was all set to move on, Lin Li stopped in his heels and turned back to the crystal ball without any explanations. Just as everyone was puzzled by Lin Li's behavior, Lin Li tapped on the crystal ball, and a gush of powerful aura erupted from the thick fog at one side of the hall. None of the creatures confined here by the high elves was easy to deal with. Upon sensing such violent and powerful aura, the team all turned tense. Because the elves had Princess Elune, who was acknowledged by the Moon Shadow Leopard, as well as the aura goddess Monfera had bestowed upon the Elven Kingdom, the unicorn had agreed to follow along. However, other than the unicorn, the countless abyssal demons locked in the numerous cells were all ferocious and untamed. Nobody knew what Lin Li wanted to do and what kind of beast he wanted to let out. Dong, dong, dong. With heavy footsteps, a gigantic creature gradually appeared out of the fog. It was indeed an abyssal demon. Haha. It's been too long. Long enough for me to forget how many years have passed. However, I'm finally out of that wretched cage now. The abyssal demon laughed recklessly. His laughter reverberated throughout the hall, filled with the joy of freedom and endless hatred for the high elves. However, what made everyone puzzled was why Lin Li chose to release this particular abyssal demon that everyone wasn't familiar with. Although he possessed powerful legendary-level abilities, he was certainly not the strongest amongst all. Looking at the abyssal demon that had walked out from the fog, Lin Li's lips curved. Actually, Lin Li had a lot of questions about this abyssal demon as well. It wasn't Randy and the team's fault for not recognizing the abyssal demon at the moment. After all, he was the demon Gordon that only existed 60 levels deep into the endless abyss. A demon like Gordon had a very special hobby. It liked to consume all kinds of magical metals. This hobby seemed similar to that of magical beasts like the metal-engulfing beasts. However, Gordon consumed these magical metals not to satiate his hunger, but because he possessed integration ability. With this ability, Gordon could use all kinds of magical metals to recast his own body continuously. With integration ability, he could obtain the magical metal just by consuming it. Lin Li had released this demon Gordon not because he had any powerful abilities. Instead, it was because he had strangely sensed a familiar aura on this demon. Lin Li couldn't make out what kind of magical metal Gordon had integrated at the moment, but since it wasn't too troublesome, he chose to release him to examine him closely. As one of the many powerful demons locked here, Gordon was still a demon from deep in the abyss even though he wasn't the top in terms of abilities. With its legendary level power and the special ability to integrate any magical metal into his body, he did have enough capital to be proud of itself. The laughter wasn't enough for Gordon to let out all his anger. He glanced at everyone in the hall and released all his pressurizing aura. With a cruel expression on his face, he said, "It's you who have released me, lowly humans. Oh, and elves. How can I thank you?" Of course, nobody would foolishly think that this demon was genuinely thankful. After feeling the intense aura, almost everyone got ready for battle. The elves had already put up their bows, while the mages held up their magic staffs. Although Chief Elder Randy hadn't shapeshifted into a WYRM yet, it was just a matter of seconds for him to do that should they really start to fight. Gordon could sense everyone was wary, but he wasn't bothered by that at all. In fact, this precisely showed that these people were frightened of him. His vision swept across the crowd and licked his lips. He continued, "To express my gratitude, I'll grant you with the great honor of becoming a part of my body. I'll start with you." Lin Li stood right next to the crystal ball, closest to Gordon. Although Gordon wanted to taste that female elf more, it didn't matter if he tasted her now or later. With that, he started walking towards Lin Li. However, just as Gordon was bragging exaggeratedly, a delicate crossbow appeared in Lin Li's hands. This was exactly the reincarnation crossbow that he had used back at the Seven Realm Spiral. Without any words, Lin Li shot out the debris of the star's thunderbolt that had been placed on the reincarnation crossbow as Demon Gordon slowly walked towards him. A faint flash of lightning suddenly appeared. Without even figuring out what was going on, Demon Gordon's body uncontrollably collapsed onto the ground. Only then did he realize that his body that had integrated so many magical metals that it had stronger defense than even a WYRM had now been disintegrated by more than half just from that one blow. this wound wasn't fatal for Gordon. He could even recover in just a little while with his ultra-strong recovery abilities. However, Gordon felt an immense fear from that blow. If that blow hadn't been targeted at his body but his head, no amount of healing abilities could have saved him. You're spouting too much rubbish. I just want to ask you one question, obey me or die, sneered Lin Li as he pointed his reincarnation crossbow on Gordon's head. At that moment, Gordon truly felt death approaching. His regrowing body suddenly stopped moving. Demon, this human is the true demon, thought Gordon. From Lin Li's cold gaze, Gordon knew clearly that he couldn't play any tricks on this human. Even if he were to reply a little late, this human would probably destroy him without any hesitation. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Lin Li had released Demon Gordon only because he was curious, and not due to any benefit he could bring to the Tower of Dusk. Thus, Lin Li didn't bother to spend too much time on this fella. Seeing that Lin Li was going to pull the trigger of the crossbow soon, Gordon, who didn't want to die now when he had just gotten out of prison, immediately yelled, "Yes, yes, I will do everything you say." Given how easily he would give in to threats, it was surprising the High Elves had confined this demon in this jail. Lin Li found this fact very funny, but he still put up a cold expression, and said, "I don't need to teach you what to do, right?" "Yes, yes." Gordon felt that he was too unlucky. Just as he thought that he had regained freedom, he couldn't even celebrate that for more than 15 minutes before landing in another prison. Although he wasn't willing, he didn't dare to hesitate in presenting his soul to Lin Li, fearing that he would be killed if he wasted too much of Lin Li's time. While the team couldn't figure out why Lin Li chose to subdue this demon, Cheyenne got some inspiration from Lin Li's behavior. The Manhwa family was only left with Cheyenne as the only legendary powerhouse, so he was forced to stay and defend Aminya. This even slowed down the progress of his magical abilities. Now, although the Dark Blade had suffered a major blow, they still possessed two legendary powerhouses, so their overall strength was still higher than that of the Manhwa family. If the Manhwa family could get another legendary powerhouse, it would be greatly beneficial for the faction's development. Thinking of that, Cheyenne stopped the team just when Lin Li prepared to leave with Demon Gordon, who had regrown most of his body. He said, "Chief Elder Randy, Mage Felix, I'm really sorry, but please give me a while." With that, Cheyenne returned to the crystal ball and put his finger on it. Everyone was clear what Cheyenne was thinking, but nobody said anything and only waited, hoping to see what kind of demon Cheyenne would release. Cheyenne tapped his finger on the crystal ball for a few times, and the image on the crystal ball finally fixed. The creature confined in this cell was a demon-winged angel from the 50th level of the Abyss. It was called an angel because its wings weren't like the membranous wings of other abyssal demon, but a pair of pure white feathered wings. However, one would quickly realize that its wings weren't actually pure white, but pale white. Winged angels possessed high speed and expertised in shadowing. The bones in its two arms were also as hard as steel, making it an infamous assassin in the Abyss. In terms of assassination, winged angels wouldn't lose out to the Dark Blade's Lansdale. They were even better than him to a certain extent. After battling with the Dark Blade for so many years, the Manhwa family suffered from the Dark Blade's assassination attacks so often. Although Lansdale wouldn't attack personally most of the time, his disciples had killed so many mages from the Manhwa family. Even Cheyenne himself had suffered numerous times when fighting with the Dark Blade. Thus, Cheyenne thought of the winged angel not because he wanted to assassinate anyone, but because it would be useful for the Manhwa family's future development as a legendary assassin. Cheyenne gently tapped on the crystal ball and opened the gates of the winged angel's cell. However, everyone felt it strange that there wasn't any exploding aura even after the gates were opened. It was as if the opened cell was empty. Just then, Cheyenne, who was standing in front of the crystal ball, suddenly waved his magic staff and released a gas blast spell at his side. With a strong gust of power, his body instantaneously shifted to the side. However, the gas blast spell didn't hit any target. Before Cheyenne could stabilize himself in the new location, he suddenly turned and knocked his magic staff on the ground. A fire wave rippled from his body in all directions. However, a figure suddenly appeared behind Cheyenne just as the fire wave started to spread out. The sharp bones on its arm pierced towards Cheyenne's heart without any warning. Cheyenne couldn't help but feel rather sullen. The demon that Mage Felix had released just now uttered so much crap before attacking, while the one he had released started to strike once he had opened the gates. With an opponent whose assassination skills were no worse than Lansdale's, Cheyenne still appeared very passive even though he had considerable experience in dealing with stealth attacks. More importantly, Cheyenne had always thought that the best way to defend himself from assassination attacks was that passive defense ring. However, it was already destroyed at the Seven-Realm Spiral. If not, he wouldn't feel so threatened by the Winged Angel's attacks. Fortunately, Cheyenne's power had fully recovered at the 3rd floor of the tower. Otherwise, he really wouldn't know how to react to this. Master Cheyenne, if you want to understand the Winged Angel's abilities, it will be better to leave this place and go back to examine it, suggested Lin Li as he waved his Helios scepter. Numerous arcane missiles shot towards Cheyenne's side. Arcane missiles weren't powerful. For a legendary mage, they were actually the products of a low-level magic. Lin Li didn't intend to help Cheyenne cripple this Winged Angel. After all, the Winged Angel didn't have Gordon's heaven-defying recovery abilities. Even without using the reincarnation crossbow, the arcane missiles were enough to force the Winged Angel to reveal its tracks. Seeing that Lin Li helped him, Chief Elder Randy was embarrassed to just stand around. He signaled to Gilder to set up his bow and arrows. 14 sharp arrows fired at once, shooting out to all around Cheyenne. Although the Winged Angel was extremely fast-moving and good at hiding its tracks, the local space was small, after all. With so many legendary powerhouses' attacks, the Winged Angel was like a fly trying to escape from a gigantic fly swatter. It couldn't escape no matter where it went. Seeing that the Winged Angel had been forced to reveal its tracks, Cheyenne immediately waved his magic staff and released his much-prepared magic. After signing the soul contract with the Winged Angel, Cheyenne couldn't hide the joy in his eyes. With all the magical equipment as well as a legendary Winged Angel, the Manhwa family's strength was finally comparable to that of the Dark Blade. Moreover, it was totally possible for the Manhwa family to surpass the Dark Blade in the foreseeable future. Seeing that Lin Li and Cheyenne had conquered powerful abyssal demons consecutively, Chief Elder Randy's expression got a little unnatural. The elves had always despised allying with the demons. Undead creatures were filthy in their perception, while demons were the epitome of evil and degeneration. However, this didn't mean that Chief Elder Randy wasn't somewhat envious of Lin Li and Cheyenne. After all, those two abyssal demons weren't just some random legendary realm demons, and it was rare to find such powerful fighters. Unfortunately, he wouldn't let himself sign the soul contract with a demon. After all, an elf who did that would be despised by the entire elven population, even if he was the 8th elder. Objectively speaking, the ones who gained the most from this 4th floor were actually the elves. After all, they found their sacred unicorn, while Lin Li and Cheyenne only found a legendary fighter each. Thinking about this, Chief Elder Randy felt a little more at ease. He turned towards Lin Li and Cheyenne, and asked, Mage Felix, Mage Cheyenne, shall we proceed to the 5th floor now? Although everyone managed to get something from the 4th floor of the central tower, and the elves even managed to find their sacred unicorn, everyone was still somewhat disappointed. If it had been any other place, these would have been remarkable gains. However, this was the Sky Castle and the Immortal King's treasure's location. Such gains were truly unsatisfactory for them. When the team reached the 5th floor of the central tower, they unexpectedly found 2 intricately decorated doors at the entrance, blocking everyone's view. This was really interesting. The previous floor almost didn't have any defense mechanism in place, and they could see everything from the entrance. What could be behind these 2 closed doors? Initially, everyone was rather worried that these doors would use the magical 1000 contraption lock like that of the tower's main gate. If that was the case, nobody would be able to get in. However, Lin Li closely examined the carvings on the door and realized they were just carvings with no defense ability. With a slight push, these 2 exquisite doors slowly opened, And the next room was revealed in front of everyone's eyes. The items in the central tower had surprised everyone many times, and the fifth floor wasn't an outlier. A dozen of enormous bookshelves stood in the huge room, looking as if this was the library of this central tower. All kinds of different books filled each bookshelf in an orderly manner. Every book emitted a faint magic glow. Seeing the rows of bookshelves and countless books, everyone couldn't help feeling very excited. No matter how strong magical equipment was, it was only useful to one individual. However, knowledge could enhance everyone. Thus, any magical equipment had finite value, but the value of knowledge was limitless. No one would doubt the value of the magic-related books in here. After all, this was the last sky castle with the immortal king's treasure. During the war at the end of the Dark Age, Emerald's overall civilization level went backwards considerably, and not just in terms of the loss of alchemical knowledge, even magic was much weaker than before. Thus, the current Emerald was known as the peak of magic era only due to the two magic tides, making it relatively easier for mages to grow stronger. However, in actual fact, this era's civilization was far from the one during the Dark Age under the High Elf's rule. Everyone walked into the room with unprecedented enthusiasm. Walking through the rows of bookshelves, nobody took the lead to take any of the books. Judging from the titles and authors of the books, they already knew that these books were priceless. From theoretical studies of magic to analysis of every kind of high-level magic, the books here covered almost every aspect of the entire magic domain. Even the Supreme Council probably wouldn't own such an extensive collection, not mentioning the fact that the authors of these books were all famous powerhouses of the Dark Age. Phoenix. This is a book by Phoenix. Someone couldn't help exclaiming after seeing a few manuscripts. Although 1,300 years had passed since the Dark Age, Phoenix was still a shining name in the field of magic. As the High Elf Queen's most trusted subject, the creator of the Magic Legion and its first commander, and the creator of numerous forbidden curse spells, his achievements were all worthy of admiration. After Phoenix, the team gradually saw more and more names that shocked their souls. Egno, who was the first principal of the High Elf's Royal Magic Academy, was the greatest magic theorist of his time. The ranking system for mages, which he had conceptualized, was still in use today. Aurand, the genius mage among the High Elf's royals, and the first mage to create a magic that could convert the dragon language to High Elf's language. Melgrad, the chief royal mage and inventor of instantaneous spells. Seeing all these names that were symbols of that era, everyone's face was beaming with excitement and their eyes sparkled. Even their breaths became heavier. Everyone knew what these books meant. If powerful magical equipment could shape a powerhouse, then knowledge could breed generations of powerhouses. It would also have a measurable benefit to the future development of a faction. Finally, everyone stopped at the other end of the room. Lin Li, Cheyenne, and Randy, these three leaders of the respective factions, didn't say anything, they just looked at one another's eyes and reached a silent consensus. Almost simultaneously, the three factions spread out and started plundering this High Elf's treasure of knowledge. Although the books and manuscripts here were all very precious, there were still differences in their value, and nobody could grab all these books into their own pockets. At this time, it was a test of their judgment. Whoever could find the most valuable part in this sea of knowledge would be the greatest beneficiary. This was also the content regarding which the three parties had come to consensus within a second. All the books and manuscripts here were covered in a layer of faint magic glow. This was also an obvious indicator. When mages edited their own writings or manuscripts, they would insert their own aura into those writings. Therefore, the stronger the author, the stronger the glow around the books. Cheyenne and Elder Randy had indeed thought about that, hence reaching a tacit understanding. They then decided to grab all the books that had a halo. At the same time, they also referred to the various accomplishments and legends of famous authors in history. In fact, they didn't hesitate much or read the content in detail before stowing it away in their pockets. However, Lin Li stood rooted to the ground, seemingly fascinated for a moment. Seeing that the two of them were almost done snatching most of the books, he slowly walked towards a row of bookshelves. It didn't seem to be part of Elder Randy's and Cheyenne's consideration at all, because the magical books seemed no different from normal ones. Even though they had magical halos, the halos were extremely dim and seemed to be on the verge of vanishing. Anyone could tell that the books on that particular bookshelf were of great value if brought outside. However, they were far inferior to others. Hence, from the beginning, Chief Elder Randy and Elder Randy had already decided not to take them. Lin Li did not rush to put everything into the Ring of Endless Storm, but instead pulled out a book from the shelf, which was written by an author named adventurous. He wasn't that famous in the Dark Age. Well, at least Lin Li couldn't remember anything about the name. However, when he opened the book in his hand, he was greeted with content that made his eyes glisten. It was practically a standard book of magical materials, and there wasn't anything too mystical in the book. All of the content was rather in-depth and included plenty of theories that explained magic. It seemed that the textbook-like magical book was indeed not as valuable as the notes written by the strong figures who documented their experiences. There was no content about the enlightenment and understanding of laws, nor formidable magic that could destroy the world. However, how many members of a force could really have the ability to learn from the experiences of the powerhouses? Besides, Lin Li already had the Book of Eternity, which was written by Juresco, who was known as the god of mages. The elites of the High Elves could not compare to Juresco at all. If a force was merely supported by one or two powerful leaders, its members would forever be spoon-fed, and they would be destined to be doomed. Not only would the members of force like this be unable to provide any help for their leaders, they might even become a burden. The reason the Manhwa family and Dark Blade could possess such high authority and status in the Breezy Plains was not only because of their legendary leaders, but also because they had a strong foundation. Hence, increasing the strength of the leader was not the most valuable thing for a force. Improving the overall power and strength of the entire faction was of paramount importance. Although having a strong leader was mandatory, the leader might not be able to support the force in the long run if his underlings were all useless wastrels. The Manhwa family that was helmed by Cheyenne was a good example. Although they had a strong foundation, they still hampered Cheyenne from increasing his individual power and strength. If it weren't for the quest in the Haiga mountain range, it would probably be only a matter of time before the Manhwa family got annihilated by the Dark Blade. Lin Li looked at the cover of the magic book in his hand and noticed that there was a number annotated on the upper right corner. He then looked at the other books on the shelf to see that there were several magic books with consecutive numbers. Clearly, the books belonged to the same series, and were perhaps magic textbooks used by the High Elves in the Dark Age. Lin Li glanced through the books one by one, after which he confirmed his conjecture. Of course, the magic textbooks of High Elves were definitely not used by mage apprentices. Lin Li roughly deduced that the magic textbooks should have been used by High Elves that were akin to the level of archmages or legendary mages. In particular, there was a detailed description stating the methods to advance to the legendary realm. If anyone could master it, it would probably be easy to become a legendary mage. Apart from this set of magic books, Lin Li also grabbed some other magic books, but they all seemed rather basic. They included some explanations and analyses of magic theories. Adventurous was the author of all the magic books, and Lin Li reckoned that he should be considered a magic educator to the High Elves. In the world of Amril, Lin Li was familiar with a certain saying: while the teacher of the strong was not necessarily powerful himself, the students of a powerhouse were mostly mediocre. Apart from talent, elaborate education was important. Hence, renowned powerhouses might not be able to become great teachers. At this moment, Cheyenne and Elder Randy had already taken away all the books that they wanted, and were walking towards Lin Li curiously. They had long seen the books there, but the faint halo made them forego the idea of taking them away. Apart from feeling curious, they also gloated over the fact that Lin Li decided to take those books. "Mage Felix, how are things going?" Elder Randy asked politely with a smile, but his tone was rather derisive. Lin Li didn't avoid the question at all, and instead raised the books in his hand before answering, "Nothing too eventful. These are some magic books about basic theories that were written by an author named adventurous." "What, adventurous?" Upon hearing Lin Li's reply, Elder Randy's and Cheyenne's faces stiffened as their smiles vanished. "Yeah, are you familiar with this author named Adventurous, Elder Randy?" Lin Li asked, curiously, while turning his head to look at him. Elder Randy and Cheyenne kept their eyes peeled to the signature of the author of the magic book in Lin Li's hands. Although they remained calm on the surface after confirming that it was indeed signed by Adventurous in High Elf's print, they were overwhelmed with regret deep down. If Lin Li were to keep those books because of Adventurous, it would still be somewhat acceptable. However, the problem was that they could tell Lin Li obviously didn't know who Adventurous was. That made Cheyenne and Elder Randy, who knew who Adventurous was, feel rather flabbergasted and embarrassed. Actually, Adventurous' identity did not differ much from Lin Li's conjecture. He was indeed a noble educator amongst the High Elves who produced numerous students that became famous powerhouses, including the authors of the magic books that Lin Li and the rest had seen. Some of the authors were Phoenix and Aurand. Although Adventurous might not be the strongest amongst the High Elves, he had an extraordinary and unparalleled understanding of magic. Many of his students had made outstanding achievements in magic, but they were all accredited to the support of his magic theory. Elder Randy and Cheyenne focused only on the famous writings of the powerhouses, and managed to secure plenty of knowledge about many lost magic spells as well as the experiences of the authors. However, it could be said that all of the content was merely an extension of Adventurous' theory. They had obtained the extensions, but Lin Li gained the foundation that was solid and would allow him to add or build on it. The lost magic spells might be very powerful, but they couldn't be used by just anyone. For example, an archmage who had obtained a legendary magical spell might not be able to use it even if he memorized it completely. Without sufficient power or foundation, there would be no use even if they gained Sanctuary Realm magic. Elder Randy and Cheyenne were overwhelmed with regret. However, no matter how regretful they were, there was no turning back. Both of them had already taken the books that they wanted, and they had no choice but to look at Lin Li and watch him stow the magic books away into his ring. "There is still a chance, there must be a chance, this is only the 5th floor." Lin Li's expression was still indifferent, while Elder Randy and Cheyenne expressed their displeasure and frustration from time to time. They then left the 5th floor and made their way up the spiral stairs to the 6th floor. When they entered the hall on the 6th floor, everyone could not help but marvel at the things in front of them. They could tell from the decor that it was obviously a laboratory. Moreover, the only person who could turn an entire floor into a laboratory was probably the Immortal King. No one in this world would not be tempted or enticed by the Immortal King's laboratory. Back then, the Immortal King was known as invincible, for he was the one who created sky castles as well as much other handcrafted magical equipment. There were even legends about the Immortal King once creating an actual artifact. Since this was the laboratory of the Immortal King, they reckoned that there were probably many other hidden items. Everyone walked slowly into the laboratory, and they were suddenly struck with a peculiar feeling, as if they had passed through an invisible obstacle. However, no one had the time or mood to consider the source of the feeling that they got at this moment, because they could all clearly sense the shocking magical wave in the laboratory. The magical wave made everyone tense up, especially since they knew clearly that it was a massively powerful magical wave. Almost no one could keep calm facing such temptation, and even Elder Randy's breathing began to quicken. The elves behind him could not hold themselves back at all, let alone Cheyenne, who could not help but feel agitated despite trying his best to hide the expression on his face. Even the proud unicorn and the undead creatures Norfeller and Udgefalusi could not restrain the eagerness in their eyes. Lin Li was the only one who did not show any excitement, though he was no longer indifferent, and seemed to be in doubt and thinking about something. As the crowd slowly entered the laboratory, they felt the powerful magical wave and could not help but speed up in their tracks. It was as if the Immortal King was summoning them. The elves, especially, were not very satisfied with the gains obtained on the previous floors, and thus could not wait to make up for it on this floor. The legendary mage Kilophen, who specialized in fire magic, suddenly increased his pace and walked past the crowd to stand in front of the team. wait, Lin Li, who was walking behind, suddenly sensed that something was amiss, and was quick to give them a warning. However, before Lin Li could even finish speaking, light reflected off of a blade suddenly flashed in front of Qilifen amidst the darkness. At that moment, everything around them seemed to have lost its vibrance and luster. It was as if the dazzling light of the blade was the only thing left in the entire space. Time seemed to have frozen, the chilling light seemed domineering to the extent of cutting the limitations of space and time. It seemed to have already met Qilifen's eyes. However, any retreat would seem futile in the face of the dazzling light, and any resistance would be eradicated without mercy. Still, Qilifen was a level 21 legendary mage. Despite facing an attack that made them feel desperate and hopeless, he would still do his best to evade the ray of light to the side. At the same time, he held on to the staff to delay the attack. The light reflected off the blade and everyone heard a shriek, immediately after which they saw Qilifen quickly returning to the team with a severed arm that was spurting blood. Blood was constantly flowing from the wound, and soon a pool of blood was formed on the ground at the spot where Qilifen got attacked. The arm that was severed and still holding on to the staff looked extremely daunting. Elder Randy hurriedly used magic to stop the bleeding for Qilifen, but he kept his eyes fixed on the spot where the blade had appeared. Everyone was taken aback by the sudden attack. They'd thought that they would face no obstacles here, since they had already passed the seven-realm spiral. However, it seemed that they could not let their guard down. Everyone had their guard up now. Not long after, two shadows walked out of the dark from the area where the blade had appeared. The figures seemed to have no fear of the legendary powerhouses at all. However, the enemies that appeared made everyone feel even more confused because they seemed just like two shadows. Even though they were no longer in darkness, the two enemies still seemed blurry and almost non-existent. The two enemies were completely dark figures that seemed to have transparent bodies. The only thing that could be seen was the machete that was emitting a dazzling light. Vengeful spirits. Cheyenne had been harmed by vengeful spirits before, especially the legendary vengeful spirit that had a solid body, which had left a deep impression on him. Hence, he immediately thought about the daunting vengeful spirits when he saw the two in front. However, Elder Randy, who had just helped Qilifen heal his injury, shook his head after hearing Cheyenne exclaim in shock. No, they can't be vengeful spirits, because the aura of vengeful spirits can't be hidden at all. Unable to confirm the identity of the enemy, Elder Randy and Cheyenne looked at Lin Li, hoping that this young man who was continuously creating miracles could give them a possible answer. However, Lin Li didn't say anything and simply shook his head. Although clearly disagreeing with Cheyenne's guess too, he didn't have a clear answer either. In fact, Cheyenne had also sensed that his guess was wrong right after he explained vengeful spirits. Putting the form of the enemy aside, the enemy's ability alone seemed to be far beyond that of vengeful spirits. Although Qilifen specialized in fire magic, he was also an actual level 21 legendary mage who'd shown his rich combat experience during this battle. However, he ended up having his arm cut off as soon as the two shadow-like enemies appeared. Although it was a sneak attack, an experienced legendary mage would have heightened senses and be rather sensitive to changes in magical waves around them, even if he did not have his own magical domain. Even a legendary bandit like Lansdale might not be able to launch a surprise attack on Qilifen easily. Moreover, Cheyenne also noticed that the physical shapes of the two enemies were indeed different from that of the vengeful spirit that had a physical form. Given their performance just now, the enemies would already be in their actual physical forms if they were really vengeful spirits, and not the shadows that they were now. Everyone was still speculating about the origin of the enemies that seemed just like two shadows, but the latter obviously did not want to waste any time on this group of intruders. As soon as they stepped out of the darkness, the two shadows flickered and suddenly disappeared. By the time they appeared again, one of the shadows had arrived in front of Elder Randy, and slashed at the latter's throat with a blade. The other shadow suddenly appeared between the members of the team and aimed its machete at Princess Elune. The beautiful elven Princess Elune was almost going to get ruined by the machete. Elder Randy, who had just resisted against the enemy, broke out in a cold sweat because he was overwhelmed with fear. He hurriedly gathered everyone to protect Princess Alun and the injured Kyofen. Both Lin Li and Cheyenne could tell that although there were only 2 enemies, they were too powerful for the team to deal with alone. Therefore, no one objected to Elder Randy's request to rally. The entire team quickly formed a circular defensive formation. However, the situation did not change much since they got into formation. The blades appeared like lightning around them from time to time, sometimes from the front and sometimes from the back. Every one of them was dealing with endless lethal assaults every single moment. It was like the circular defensive formation made up of many legendary powerhouses was surrounded by countless blades. If it weren't for the fact that the 2 shadow-like enemies had come out of the dark just now, none of them would have believed that there were only 2 enemies attacking them at this moment. Even then the team could not help but wonder if there were more enemies apart from the 2 shadows. They could not help but be in doubt, because they could not get a clear view of the shadows that were moving rapidly with their eyes alone. The only thing they could see were the flashes of light from the blades when they were getting attacked. Even the wind elementals that moved quickly were like snails compared to these 2 shadows. Even the winged angel that Cheyenne had just acquired could not compare to the shadows at all. At the instant that it was summoned, there were already many other wounds on its body, and it did not seem effective at all. At this moment, Lin Li also summoned Gordon that he had previously subdued. However, Gordon's speed was way too slow when compared to the attacking speed of the other 2 shadows. The only noteworthy part about it was that it could help them take some of the attacks. It was like a shield made out of flesh. Gordon's body, which was a fusion of various magical metals, could bring some effect. Lin Li was careful to guard against the shrewd attacks from time to time, but there wasn't a single time that he had stopped thinking about the origin of these 2 shadows. Despite the fact that there were plenty of legendary figures in the team, the current situation was not optimistic. They were passively defending. Even the strongest defense would be broken down one day, and counterattacks were the only way to break out of a situation like theirs. If they wanted to retaliate, they would have to figure out the origin of the enemy. Otherwise, a blind counterattack would be no different from courting death. However, Lin Li still could not remember encountering or hearing about anything that had the same aura and shape as the 2 shadows. He knew that they were not vengeful spirits, because he could only feel their magical waves, and not the undead aura that should be present in undead creatures. They were not life forms of dark element either, despite their shadow-like appearance. Lin Li could come up with some entities that similarly only possessed magical waves if it were purely based on feelings. It seemed that only the alchemy colossus driven by the alchemy array could fit the description. Alchemy colossuses were neither undead nor alive, hence lacking both life aura and undead aura. The activation of an alchemy array required magical crystals as the source of mana. Hence, it was not surprising that there were pure magical waves. Everyone knew that the alchemy colossuses were called colossuses because they were extremely tall and similar to titans in terms of build and size. Besides, their power was extremely terrifying and they could even match up to WYRMS. More importantly, the alchemy colossus had to be controlled and manipulated by someone. Regardless of how small the alchemy colossus was made to be by the alchemist, they still had to have room for manipulation. Now, the 2 shadows faced by the people were about the size of ordinary humans. Although they were not weak, they showed unparalleled speed, which was complementing their shrewd and sharp attacks. Regardless of appearance or attacking method, the 2 shadows were worlds apart from the alchemy colossuses. Cheyenne had no choice but to put his winged angel away. The angel's injury had yet to heal completely in the first place, yet it almost got dismembered by the 2 shadow machetes. Cheyenne didn't want his underling to be destroyed just after he had painstakingly acquired it. However, although Cheyenne did not have the help of the winged angel, he did not slip into a tricky situation, because he had resolutely replaced his magic robe and staff with the Pharaoh's robe and dark moon magic staff, respectively. Actually, when he first got that magical equipment, Cheyenne wanted to try it on, but he had no choice but to be patient in order not to seem so eager in front of them because of his pride. The Pharaoh's robe and dark moon magic staff were undeniably worthy of being the standard equipment of the well-known magic legion of the High Elves. They had indeed greatly improved the combat power of their users. With those two pieces of equipment, Cheyenne would definitely win a battle against a level 22 legendary powerhouse even if he could not reach level 22. After seeing that the defensive magewefts on the pharaoh's robe had blocked the blades, Cheyenne retaliated by waving the dark moon magic staff in his hand. He could not help but secretly rejoice in his heart. If it were not for this powerful magic equipment, he might have really been the first to be defeated. Cheyenne definitely attracted the attention of others when he changed into the pharaoh's robe and held dark moon magic staff, especially the elves. Elder Randy was particularly displeased. However, at this time, he did not have time to regret anymore. Faced with the attacks of the machetes, he could only passively defend himself, and that was definitely not a good sign. In fact, they could not be considered to be defending at all, for they were just being attacked. None of them knew when the attacks would appear and when the shadows would pop up beside them. Only when faced with the attacks would they hurriedly evade and defend. Hielophant, use the crystal ball to track them. Elder Randy exclaimed, rather inspired by Cheyenne. He'd suddenly thought about the crystal ball he obtained on the first floor. Although there was no massive source of mana to fully exert the power of the magewef on the crystal ball, it should have no problem detecting the attacks of the enemies. After taking the space equipment handed to him by Elder Randy, Hielophant stood in the middle and placed the huge crystal ball on the ground. Although half of his arm was gone, the legendary mana he had was not affected. He pressed his left hand on the crystal ball and injected some mana into the crystal ball to activate it. Everything around him suddenly appeared in the crystal ball. Only 2 out of the 13 magewefts on the crystal ball were lit up as the invisible mana spread out to the surroundings. Clearly, the magewefts did perform their purpose, even though they did not know the origin of the two shadows. The two shadows seemed to have slowed down slightly, and they could at least see the trajectory of their movement that was captured in the crystal ball. Mage Velik, be careful, your left. Elder Randy, look out for the sky. Princess Elune became a temporary commander, constantly conveying the information seen in the crystal ball to everyone present. With the help of the crystal ball, everyone's defense began to make the cut because they finally knew the directions which the attacks came from. At least, they were no longer as flustered as before. However, that did not mean that the situation had changed, because the attacks of the shadows were truly lethal and dangerous. The dazzling reflection of the blades flashed around everyone like lightning, catching them off guard. Although the speed of the shadows did slow down due to the minor effects of the dreamy magewef, their attacking speed was not affected. It was just like the fact that while running was faster than walking, it had nothing to do with landing strikes. What gave everyone a headache apart from the speed that seemed to be as fast as lightning was the unpredictable angle of attacks. Even if the direction of the enemy's general movement was known, one might not be able to know which body part the enemy would be attacking. After all, the human body was still too fragile, and almost every part of it was a weak point. The enemy obviously did not have a penchant for slitting throats. As long as it was a fatal spot, anywhere could be their target for attack. More importantly, the attacks of the shadows seemed to have been launched with complete disregard for their own safety. Each attack was launched as if they were ready to die together with Lin Li and the rest. However, no one wanted to be so selfless as to give up for the benefit of others. Hence, any attack instead of defense would be nonsense at this juncture. The most effective course of action would be to continuously defend. Lin Li did not give up on speculating on the origin of the two shadows, because there seemed to be no other way for them to get out of their current predicament apart from finding out where the shadows came from. Although the power of the debris of the stars was infinite, it still had to accurately hit the target in order to work. The movement of the two shadows seemed elusive, as if they were just teleporting. The legendary archers had already shot plenty of arrows, let alone Lin Li the mage. Just when everyone was feeling puzzled, Ujfalusi, who had just escaped the attack, seemed to have discovered something. He turned to look at Lin Li, who was not too far away, and said, "Master, I seem to feel some traces of necromagic on the enemy." Necromagic? Lin Li could not help but frown. The two shadows clearly were not undead creatures. Since they were not, what did they have to do with necromagic? As the blade struck again, a sudden guess popped up in Lin Li's mind. Given the previous doubts and the conditions required for necromagic to be used, Lin Li could not help but wonder if the two shadow-like enemies were the ultimate alchemy product mentioned in alchemical legends, alchemy puppets. Lin Li had once compared the alchemy colossus to the two shadows, but he unfortunately could not find a way to explain the unique shape, despite the fact that the other conditions had been met. However, if they were alchemy puppets, there would be a good explanation for their physique, because controlling the alchemy puppets were souls that did not need a medium. If the two shadow-like monsters were really legendary alchemy puppets, they would undoubtedly be from the immortal king. At such a level of alchemy, even Lin Li had no choice but to be in awe and think to himself, it's no wonder that the immortal king is termed as invincible and omnipotent. After making several observations, Lin Li affirmed his speculations. Whether the two shadows were moving or attacking, there was no lag or passiveness in their actions at all. From the perspective of others, they were no different from legendary bandits. If it were others, Lin Li probably wouldn't associate them with alchemical products at all. However, Lin Li was well aware that that was a very remarkable feature of the alchemy puppets. It also concerned the necromagic that Ujfalusi was talking about. An alchemy colossus had to be controlled and manipulated by someone, for it would just be a pile of scrap iron without any controller. The alchemy puppets were naturally no exception, except that they were controlled by the souls sealed in bodies using necromagic. It could be said that alchemy puppets were the product of the combination of alchemy and necromagic. Lin Li also researched quite a bit about alchemy, and was well aware that alchemy puppets were not just a reduced and smaller version of the alchemy colossus. The enlargement and reduction of each alchemy array was not a simple change in size of the image, because it involved all aspects of alchemy as well. One could imagine what would happen to a giant alchemy colossus that was tens of meters tall if it were to be reduced to the size of ordinary humans. However, the alchemy puppet was not a reduced version of the alchemy colossus, because the knowledge required to create it was much greater than what was needed to create the alchemy colossus. The internal structure of the alchemy puppet was so complicated that even if the alchemy colossus could be shrunk, it would not be comparable. Compared to the alchemy colossus, the alchemy array used by the alchemy puppets was far from being just elaborate. It was not because of its small size, but because it was required to give the alchemy puppets more power. Not only did the number of alchemy arrays not decrease because of the size of the alchemy puppet, it actually increased. Most of the alchemy arrays could not be completed even by an alchemy guru. It was precisely because of the demanding conditions that alchemy puppets seemed to exist only in legends. In fact, it was a far-fetched idea. Almost no one could imagine who could create it. It was also the reason Lin Li had not associated the alchemy puppet with the two shadows at the beginning. Indeed, the immortal king was omnipotent. However, there couldn't really be an omnipotent, almighty existence in this world, for even the deities could not be invincible. Still, Lin Li now knew that the immortal king was indeed learned in alchemy. However, Lin Li knew even more clearly that what he needed to do now was not to marvel over how formidable the immortal king was. Since he knew that they were facing alchemy puppets, the most important thing to do next would be to figure out how to deal with the two puppets. The alchemy puppets might be small, but their combat power was definitely above that of the alchemy colossuses. In particular, it was said that legendary spirits were sealed in the strong alchemy puppets, thus making them even more horrifying. However, just like how an alchemy colossus needed a controller, the most crucial part of the alchemy puppets was not the magical crystal that provided massive power, nor the complicated alchemy array. Instead, it was the soul that was sealed within. Countless rays of light from the reflections of the blades surrounded the crowd. Although there were only two attackers, everyone felt that they were facing several enemies at the same time. When they were faced with the siege of hundreds of wind elementals, they were worried about their depletion of magic apart from continuously putting up the magical defense. However, whenever the blades flashed, it would cause them to be so terrified that they'd break out in a cold sweat. It made them feel like they were dancing on a tightrope, all tensed up. They could not afford to be careless at all. Although the crystal ball slowed down the speed of the alchemy puppets and showed the opponent's trail of attack, the movement of the alchemy puppets was still not visible to the human eye. retaliating was still a problem that could not be solved. Lin Li had once tried to continuously cast dozens of thousand miles of ice in a row, but the slowing effects that came with the ice element magic did not have much of an effect on the alchemy puppets. Even if there were a real master of curses with them, it would be difficult to make all kinds of spells work on alchemy puppets. Anxiety was written all over the group's faces, and their worries could not be hidden at all. They were all thinking hard about how to deal with the two difficult enemies. However, when faced with the two top-class assassins that were coming and going without a trace, it would be a far-fetched idea not to pay any price for retaliating against the full-blown attacks. All of a sudden, everyone realized that the environment around them had become a world with only two colors, black and white, without them even realizing. It was the young mage Lin Li's light and darkness domain. Everyone could not help but be astonished when they finally realized what was going on. Although it was also because they were distracted by the elusive enemies, they still found Lin Li's knowledge in magical domains to be incredible because he could activate his domain without alarming anyone. Was Lin Li trying to take advantage of his control over the magical domain to capture the trails of those two enemies? Although they were surprised by Lin Li's mastery of the laws of light and darkness, they could not understand why he decided to activate his magical domain at this moment. Mages indeed had great control and power over the magical domains that they created. However, the problem now was that the enemy was not invisible, but was just moving too quickly. Hence, using the magical domain to capture the trail of their movements would probably be less effective than using the giant crystal ball. However, Lin Li did not explain anything to them, and instead proceeded to activate the light and darkness domain, after which the angels of light and dark began to condense quickly and hover in the air. There were no violent mana waves or fluctuations, and everything seemed as natural as breathing. It was as if the angels of light and dark naturally existed in the first place. It did not seem to contradict with the surrounding environment at all. Everyone only started making gains during exploration of the central tower of the Sky Castle when they entered and obtained the crystal ball and magical equipment. No one would have imagined that Lin Li had already started collecting some gains right from the moment he stepped into the orderly maze. Everyone knew what the magic of the seven-realm spiral meant to the mages. The domain magic that was cast by the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm could be said to be the holy grail of all mages, who yearned for it as the ultimate form of their magical domain. The application of the nomological power in the seven-realm spiral as well as the changes and creation of laws had almost reached the level of creation. However, despite knowing this, no one dared to peep at it and try to learn some tricks when they were in an ultimate magical domain. The mystery of magic of the sanctuary realm could not be peeped at easily. Without the major mental strength support of the sanctuary realm, even souls would be immediately destroyed by the formidable nomological power. He initially had massive mental strength that exceeded that of ordinary people, coupled with the ever-increasing equality of the ring of the evil eye tyrant that made Lin Li's mental strength reach the sanctuary realm. Otherwise, Lin Li wouldn't have been able to retaliate against the power that was greater than the sanctuary realm when he was in the last realm of the seven-realm spiral. The massive mental strength that was comparable to the sanctuary realm powerhouses, coupled with Juresco's techniques that were recorded in the Book of Eternity, gave Lin Li the chance to explore and observe the mysteries of the laws in the seven-realm spiral. The gluttony of the elemental Wyrm Xiao Hua casually gave Lin Li a huge helping hand, causing the domain that was no longer supported by mana to lose its attacking ability. Hence, it could only allow Lin Li to observe it brazenly. Of course, the seven-realm spiral was still created based on the laws of others, and Lin Li could only gain more inspiration and a deeper understanding of the laws. Lin Li had to continuously digest the new information and gain a better understanding and mastery of his own nomological power through these inspirations rather than immediately advance a few levels to become a powerhouse of the sanctuary realm. Although they had only stepped into the seven-realm spiral not too long ago, Lin Li had already gotten a greater understanding of laws within a short period of time. In the beginning, when Lin Li had obtained holy light and darkness, he had still had to rely on his frost domain as the foundation to display the two conflicting forces at the same time. After legendary level battles, Lin Li got a clearer idea of the light and darkness laws, especially after the battle with the elven legendary mage, Vidas. He then stopped relying on laws of ice, and exhibited his light and darkness domain. However, even at that level, Lin Li was still using pure light and darkness nomological power. It wasn't until he entered the seven-realm spiral that he could truly fuse the two conflicting laws together through studying various laws in the ultimate magical domain. That was also the reason Lin Li could combine the power of the light and darkness laws to create the light and darkness sword and use the immense power within it to brutally break Stephen's soul-devouring domain. At this moment, after Lin Li opened the light and darkness domain, he did not target and attack the enemies that were appearing every now and then. Instead, he began to condense his light and darkness sword again under the angels of light and dark. In the light and darkness domain, the huge rays of black and white light that contained plenty of mana continuously shot into the air. Lin Li raised the Helios scepter high up in the sky, and a light and darkness sword began to form gradually while emitting strong waves of mana. If it weren't for the fact that every layer of the tower was extremely tall and vast, the light and darkness sword would probably pierce through the ceiling. Seeing this familiar scene, the people around them could not understand what Lin Li was trying to do. They wondered, surely this young mage isn't preparing to use the light and darkness sword again to shred the two enemies into bits like how he tore apart Stephen's soul-devouring domain? Although everyone already knew from Lin Li's battle with Stephen that light and darkness sword possessed immense power, no one had ever seen a battle between legendary mages end within seconds prior to that one. Even Elder Randy had no choice but to admit that he might not be able to bear the damage caused by the light and darkness sword even if he were to turn into a silver dragon. However, Stephen's soul-devouring domain was still, and did not run around like the elusive shadows. Even if the two enemies were surrounded by Lin Li's magical domain, they were still moving, and catching them would be terribly difficult. They wondered, in other words, this mage Felik wants to create a huge explosion to eliminate the two enemies that are hard to deal with. However, the two enemies seemed to be much stronger than the legendary bandit Lansdale. Besides, they were so terrifyingly quick that they probably wouldn't be affected by the mana explosion. No matter how many people were in doubt, the light and darkness sword had already been condensed by the time Lin Li raised the Helios scepter into the air. After a while, the light and darkness sword finally reached the point of being as powerful as it was when Stephen's soul-devouring domain was destroyed. However, when the light and darkness sword was waiting to attack, Lin Li did not look toward the target, and instead kept his eyes fixed at the front. He pursed his lips slightly and seemed to have some feelings in his eyes. Mage Felice, pay attention to your left and right. The two enemies are already charging towards you, Princess Elune suddenly said in her usual cold voice, sounding a little worried yet hopeful. Although no one knew what Lin Li was going to do, they all hoped that he could create another miracle in this situation. It seemed that the two alchemy puppets had also felt the threat of Lin Li's light and darkness sword. Although there was no communication between them, they immediately treated Lin Li as their main target. Everyone watched as Lin Li lowered the Helios scepter and pointed it in front. At the same time, the light and darkness sword that was hovering in the air also slammed against the ground forcefully. Seeing this, everyone could not help but sigh, because the light and darkness sword that clearly contained massive mana was slammed into outer space. Even if the aftermath of the explosion could affect the enemy, the effect wouldn't be great. However, the disappointment in everyone's heart was replaced by surprise immediately after it emerged because the changes that happened after the light and darkness sword exploded were much different from that of the strike that broke the soul-devouring domain. There was no earth-shattering mana explosion or any deafening roars. It was as if the sword was simply raised high up in the air and put down again, gently. The solid giant sword condensed by the power of light and darkness actually fell silent. However, with the collapse of the light and darkness sword, a tiny magical domain appeared right at the spot where the giant sword fell in Lin Li's light and darkness domain, emitting a familiar magical wave. It's the soul-devouring domain. The people present were definitely not unfamiliar with it, because Stephen's soul-devouring domain had left a strong impression on them. Although the soul-devouring domain was destroyed by Lin's light and darkness sword not long after it appeared, that did not mean that Stephen's soul-devouring domain was weak, but rather that Lin Li's light and darkness sword was simply too strong. Everyone could sense that the soul-devouring domain in front of them was much weaker than the one that Stephen had once exhibited. However, its magical waves were exactly the same. The question was, how did the soul-devouring domain appear here, and why did it appear in the young mage Lin Li's light and darkness domain? Could it be that the young mage Felix had already understood all the laws of the soul-devouring domain during that battle, and even created a new soul-devouring domain? However, that'd be impossible, because even deities wouldn't be able to master a new law and create a new magical domain within such a short period of time. Even Lin Li himself was filled with doubts. Although he could already fuse the two nomological powers of light and darkness, the fusion brought about various unexpected changes apart from giving him greater power. Light and darkness were two conflicting forces in the first place. When they were fully fused, they would no longer be just light and darkness. Instead, they formed an existence that could not be fathomed even by Lin Li. He still had to slowly find out what kind of features and law it belonged to. What he knew at present was that when he destroyed Stephen's soul-devouring domain, the power seemed to be able to devour some of the regular characteristics of the soul-devouring domain. Although Lin Li did not have much knowledge on nor researched the soul-devouring domain, he thought of releasing the laws of the soul-devouring domain after deducing that the enemies were alchemy puppets. Although the laws that were completely different were not enough for creating a complete soul-devouring domain, he reckoned that a reduced version of the soul-devouring domain should be able to deal with the two alchemy puppets. Since the laws in the soul-devouring domain were not fathomed and mastered by Lin Li himself, it would naturally be impossible for him to apply them at will. Hence, in order to successfully replicate the soul-devouring domain, he had no choice but to redo everything. If anyone paid attention, they would discover that the light and darkness sword he had just condensed was not any different from before, be it in terms of strength or whatever. Indeed, everything turned out to be like what Lin Li had expected. With the disintegration of the light and darkness sword, the laws from the soul-devouring domain appeared, and formed an incomplete and reduced version of the soul-devouring domain. In the world where only black and white existed, the small light blue swirl of soul-devouring domain was particularly eye-catching. Without the horrendous wails of the countless vengeful spirits and storm, it was probably what the prototype of the soul-devouring domain originally created by the Lord of Souls, Mephistos, looked like. This soul-devouring domain might not be a threat to others at all, but it would be extremely deadly to the soul sealed in the alchemy puppets, just like holy light to the undead creatures. The two alchemy puppets that were darting towards Lin Li suddenly appeared out of nothingness and began twitching unsteadily, though they seemed to be unable to move any further as if they were rooted to the ground. Next, everyone watched as the two shadow-like alchemy puppets emitted a burst of blue light from each of their bodies and eventually fell to the ground as the light dissipated. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.